Myanmar's military government is digging its heels in as protests erupt and global condemnation spreads over its execution of democracy activists, risking the wrath of fellow ASEAN members and stricter international sanctions. The army chiefs say the 4 men put to death were treated with due respect but deserved their fate.
Outrage in the streets of Yangon, a day after Myanmar carried out its first capital punishment in decades. But the military rulers here are unbowed, saying the 4 men should have been given death sentences many times. A spokesman said the government anticipated the criticism, but insists the executions were lawful and carried out in the name of justice. Due process was followed, he says, and the men were allowed to talk to family through video call. The families of veteran democracy activist Ko Jimmy and former National League for Democracy lawmaker Pio Zeato and 2 others say they were not informed of the executions beforehand. Protests have flared, with fear spreading that more deaths are coming. Demonstrators marched and chanted through Yangon. But the anger is not confined to Myanmar. In neighbouring Thailand, hundreds gathered in front of the Myanmar embassy in Bangkok, hands held high in a 3-finger salute, a defining symbol of resistance to military rule. South Korea also decrying the military's disregard for human rights and the rule of law.
우리 정부는 이러한 행위가 미얀마의 평화와 안정에 결코 도움이 되지 않는 조치라는 점을 강조하며 자제를 엄중히 촉구합니다.
For the US, there can no longer be business as usual for Myanmar leaders.
We urge all countries to ban the sale of military equipment to Burma, to refrain from lending the regime any degree of international credibility, and we call on ASEAN to maintain its important precedent, only allowing Burmese non-political representation at regional events.
ASEAN chair Cambodia has called the timing of the executions highly reprehensible, ahead of a meeting of foreign ministers next week. Myanmar's foreign minister is not invited to the meeting, and with these executions, that isolation has deepened.
Malaysia is condemning Myanmar's execution of the 4 activists and calls the action a crime against humanity. Foreign Minister Saifuddin Abdullah made the comments at a joint media briefing with the UN Special Envoy on Myanmar, Noeleen Heyzer, at the Malaysian Parliament. CNA's Melissa Goh has more.
Well, Malaysia Foreign Minister Saifuddin Abdullah couldn't hide his disappointment. The execution of the 4 Myanmar activists was shocking and shouldn't have happened, despite warnings from ASEAN chair and other international leaders. Now, to show that the grouping is serious and has had enough, Mr. Saifuddin Abdullah said political representatives from Myanmar's military government should be banned from attending all ministerial meetings from now on, and not just to attend the summits. Now, he also talked about the lack of progress in achieving the 5-point consensus. In fact, it's a setback, he said, but stopped short of saying that what the military government did in carrying out the execution 1 week before ASEAN foreign ministers due to meet again in Phnom Penh has jeopardized talks and eroded any trust that's left.
We feel that this is a crime against humanity, that as if the junta is making a mockery of the 5-point consensus, and I think we really have to look at this very, very seriously.
Mr. Saifuddin, who earlier met UN Special Envoy on Myanmar, Dr. Noeleen Heyzer, who's on a 2-day mission to Malaysia, said they both shared similar views that a framework with clear timeline is necessary going forward in order to achieve the so-called endgame, which is to return Myanmar to democratic rule, where lasting peace is possible. But both agree that economic sanction is simply not an option, given that half of Myanmar's population are living in poverty.
This is a multi-dimensional crisis that is very much linked also to the weakening of state institutions and the economy.
Although not many ASEAN member countries agree, Malaysia has always insisted on engaging stakeholders from the National Unity Government, or NUG, and the Consultative Council, the NUCC. In fact, Mr. Saifuddin met his counterpart from Myanmar shadow government in Washington in May and remains adamant that all stakeholders must get on board in order to arrive at a truly Myanmar-led and Myanmar-owned solution. Now, although that roadmap remains elusive, as ASEAN foreign ministers due to meet again in Phnom Penh on August 3rd. Melissa Goh, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Singapore Foreign Affairs Minister Vivian Balakrishnan says that the executions of the political detainees is a grave setback for ASEAN's efforts to facilitate a peaceful resolution and national reconciliation in Myanmar. Dr. Balakrishnan is calling for the release of all political detainees. He says a peaceful resolution of the crisis can only be achieved through constructive dialogue among all parties. He's also offered his condolences to the families of all victims.